I saw Teller today. Guard Captain Teller, that is. Of course, I knew him as Sergeant Teller, but the last time I called him that, he threatened to have me arrested. I wouldn't say we were ever friends, but we did once have a kind of mutual respect. Something I think he lost after I was discharged from the Guard. He never did like that I kept the coat. Something about seeing a civilian in uniform really struck a nerve with him. Today marks the 112th day of our voyage, and our 4th day stuck in this storm. Captain Lysander expects it to last another 2 weeks. I never thought I'd miss the hard days of sailing, but at least there was something to do. Besides journaling. In my last entry, I told the story of my homeland, the S.P.R.'s creation. How 16 years ago we built a great republic and united the 9 communities under its banner. Unfortunately, that was just one part of a much grander story. One without a happy ending. The following years were some of the Republic's darkest, and I am far from proud of the part I played in them. You know, it was strange seeing Taylor again today. Recruiting him was one of the greatest mistakes I ever made. And I made a lot of mistakes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Republic's rise and fall is an intricate tale, after all, so I think it might be best to pick up from where I last left off. The S.P.R. story continues, at the dawn of a new year and a new era of expansion. After a turbulent first year, our new republic found itself looking to the future. Because while most states had remained small, divided communities, the farming state of Solendia had rapidly risen to power. Through devious political schemes and a relaxed approach to human rights, Solendia's population had grown exponentially, and the extra votes they gained from this had won them the presidency. What followed this was a kind of political arms race, as every state competed for new citizens of their own. Recruiters were hired and sent far outside state borders, in search of new settlements on the frontier. And it wasn't long before they found them, as the countryside was littered with tiny villages and communities. Settler caravans were organized and dispatched for the Republic proper, and a settlement rush began shortly thereafter. By the end of the spring, the fledgling Republic of the year prior had changed beyond recognition. The mass influx of settlers had almost doubled the S.P.R.'s population, and the states had grown significantly to accommodate them. The Sanctuary of Orthanc had easily grown the most, with the promise of a fresh start and a clean slate appealing to many Illager bandits. The merchant state of Slateport wasn't far behind. Its people are quick to recognize the value of the skilled craftsmen and traders arriving. The Hellenic monks and hermits of the SCA saw more moderate growth, offering only quiet lives of faith and solitude along the eastern frontier. While the central state of Longbourn drew comparatively little, its open pastures attracting only shepherds, ranchers, and cowboys, and, strangely, artists. The mountain stronghold of Frozen Spires, on the other hand, barely grew at all. And the anarchist commune of Lemon only took in stragglers and outcasts. This rapid increase in population brought political upheaval with it, with the larger states of Solendia and Orthanc becoming dominant powers, and holding the majority of the Senate's votes between them. While smaller states like Longbourn and Lemon fell into near irrelevancy, with Frozen Spires becoming something short of a Solendian vassal state. This new diversity also brought about a kind of cultural revolution, as new traditions were shared and embraced within local communities. This was particularly true in the East, where each state cultivated their own unique microcultures, while the Western states developed a single, shared culture, owing largely to Laketown's network of roads and trade routes. Speaking of Laketown, the state I called home was faring poorly in this new environment. Despite having many benefits, Laketown's unique construction had one significant drawback. Building on a lake was slow and expensive. Laketown just couldn't expand as fast as its neighbors, and this had drastic consequences, both politically and economically. Once the largest state on the continent, Laketown's population was now only middling, making it easily outvoted in the Senate. While the state's previously thriving economy now spiraled into recession, following the complete collapse of its maritime trade. You see, Laketown's economy hinged on a network of naval trade routes, where resources from the frontier were brought back and sold onto the land. But as these settlements were abandoned one by one, their occupants moving to the Republic proper, this stream of wealth ran dry. The other states who had previously relied on Laketown for much of their trade began to look elsewhere, with the East quickly falling into Slateport's economic sphere. And to Laketown's governors, the Council of Guilds, this would not do. Fortunately though, for them at least, they did have one last trick up their sleeve. Having originally formed the Republic, the Council had included a controversial clause in its constitution: the right to appoint a Premier. The Premier was a permanent member of government with special powers to serve Laketown's interests, and as Laketown's senator, that position fell to me. Under the Council's guidance, I used those corrupt privileges to inflate Laketown's power, and the other states were, understandably, upset. News publications in the East decried the tyranny of Laketown, and the Land of Lemon withdrew from politics altogether in protest, becoming an observer state. Fortunately though, for me this time, it wasn't long before the public's attention was drawn elsewhere. Over the last few months, the celestial body known as S.P.R's comet had been visible in the sky, harmlessly orbiting the Earth. That changed in the early summer, however, as the rock finally entered the atmosphere and broke apart in a brilliant spectacle of light. While much of the comet burnt up before reaching the ground, one of the larger fragments crash-landed between Laketown and Orthanc. Of course, the comet's discoverer, one Dr. Zangel S.P.R, had been warning of such an event for weeks. But these warnings had fallen on deaf ears, beginning a long-standing tradition of the government ignoring scientific advice. The Republican Guard quickly cordoned off the crash site, restricting access to all but a small team of Laketown scientists. Led by renowned Professor Eugene Schultz, the team settled in for months of arduous research. As the dust settled, the S.P.R. was treated to a brief moment of respite as the rest of the season passed without incident. We didn't know it then, but those few weeks of peace and quiet was something we would all come to miss dearly. It didn't last, of course, as with the falling leaves of autumn came fire and smoke. On a cool September evening, a column of smoke could be seen rising above the rooftops of Salendia, as the ceiling of the state's central keep was engulfed in flame. Suspecting arson, the local garrison poured all their strength into fighting the blaze, abandoning their posts and patrols to help contain the spread. Unfortunately, they would only realize too late that this was just a distraction. It wasn't until sunrise that reinforcements finally arrived. The keep's fire was extinguished, the gap in the stoneworks was plugged, and the monsters that had escaped the sun's wrath were promptly returned to the earth. The founding farmers were found unharmed, having taken refuge in the keep's cellar. But this hardly made up for the countless lives that were lost. The following investigation confirmed our suspicions. The explosives used were man-made, as an analysis confirmed the use of TNT. More damning evidence, though, was what seemed to be a calling card left by the attacker. Written on a birch sign on an undamaged section of wall were 11 words: "Through cleansing fire, I earn my place in the Blessed Isle." A summary appeal for witnesses produced several accounts of a cloaked rider on a pale horse who had been skulking about the evening prior. If one thing was clear, it was that the Republican Guard were woefully unprepared for attacks of this kind. Having originally been formed as just a peacekeeping force, the Guard simply didn't have the manpower it needed, and so a recruitment drive was launched. Several new squadrons were raised, and regular patrols were organized around major population centers. 3 sergeants were brought on to assist in local coordination, with the senators of both Salendia and Slateport volunteering for the role. The 3rd sergeant would be one Marcus Teller, a prominent member of Laketown's community, and who I was sure would make a valuable addition to the team. This investment quickly paid off, as just a week later, another sign was discovered in the Federal Senate building. Printed on familiar birch wood were written the words, "I am the Sugarcane Bandit." This wasn't the only surprise in store, though, as a preliminary search uncovered a narrow tunnel dug beneath the Senate floor, housing several meters of redstone wiring. The circuit was quickly identified as a detonator, and while no explosives were found, large cavities dug under the desks of every senator confirmed this. With Senate proceedings scheduled for that afternoon, it seemed we'd uncovered an assassination plot. The day's politics were naturally cancelled, and the state senators were informed of the danger they'd been in. News leaked to the press shortly after, and the following rise in tensions saw Slateport formally close its borders. In the wake of this chilling discovery, one important realization dawned on us. No explosives had been found in the Senate building, and yet the attack had been expected for that afternoon, suggesting that the TNT was already cached and ready to go. We knew that if we acted quickly, the Guard could find and seize this stockpile and prevent another attack, and so, a series of unannounced raids were conducted across the Republic. For all the criticism these searches would draw, we were actually successful. A stockpile of 16 TNT was discovered in Longbourn, stashed in the back of an abandoned merchant wagon. The state authorities denied all knowledge of this, of course, although local witnesses saw it parked there several days earlier by a cloaked rider on a pale horse. Despite our initial success, the investigation quickly stagnated. Countless arrests were made, but each suspect was cleared of all charges. With no further leads to follow up on, we had no choice but to watch and wait for the attacker to resurface. As the months passed and December arrived, a sense of normalcy had returned, and my duties as a senator finally caught up to me. I reluctantly returned to the Senate, expecting brief formalities to mark the beginning of election season. You can imagine my surprise then when 4 Eastern senators took to the stand together and made an unorthodox announcement. This coalition of Eastern states announced their immediate secession from the Republic, citing the corrupt nature of the Premier title and increasingly invasive tactics of the Guard. Shocked silence turned to outrage, and then again to negotiation. Desperate to preserve a united republic, the Western states conceded, offering reforms to rein in the Guard's power and abolish the Premier title outright. This satisfied 3 of the antagonized senators, who withdrew their declarations to remain member states. The 4th, though, the Hellenic state, was not so easily appeased, and the archbishops stormed from the Senate Hall to follow through on their promise. The 8 remaining states were left to conduct business as usual. The campaigning season came and went, and when Election Day finally arrived, Orthank's senator won in a clean sweep. This was to no one's surprise, of course, as without the Hellenic state, the West held a majority in the Senate. Tensions had been high throughout the elections following the bomb plot, but as the proceedings drew to a close, I felt myself finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Alas, it seemed that breath was just a moment too soon. The Guard garrison were quick to act, securing the area and tending wounds. I was badly injured, having taken shrapnel to the face. I never would regain use of the eye. Exiting through the breach in the wall, we were met with a gruesome sight. Our would-be assassin lay dead in several pieces. Having apparently died in the blast, their identity was anyone's guess, as what was left of their remains was now impossible to identify. I couldn't help but notice, though, that hitched to a post not far away was the attacker's mount, a pale horse. A quick search of its saddlebags confirmed our suspicions, revealing an unwritten birch sign and all too familiar calling card. With dusk rapidly approaching, the senators returned home, and the evidence we had was sent back to Laketown for investigation. As for the horse, well, it just so happened I was in need of one. I named him Failure, after his former owner. Riding back to Laketown, I couldn't shake that lingering sense of dread. The attack was over, and our assailant dead, so why did I feel so uneasy? I would soon find out, when I stopped by the courthouse to report in to the Council of Guilds. To my surprise, the room before me was empty, save for the scattered parchments and overturned furniture littering the floor. The lonely silence lay in stark contrast to the chaos it implied. And walking through it, that strange serenity gave way to total apprehension. To my horror, at the seat of the council's leader, Tristan Bartz, I found a sign made from fine birch wood. Inscribed upon it, in long dried ink, were 3 words in Old Celendian: Sic semper tyrannis. Thus, always to tyrants. Rallying the local garrison, we formed a search party immediately. Guardsmen were sent door to door, while Sergeant Teller rode out to scout our neighbor states. By morning, the search was complete, returning no signs of our missing councilman. Word of the disappearance had spread throughout the night, and with the dawn came chaos. Brawls and riots broke out across the state as political groups clashed over the power vacuum. The Guard garrison were powerless to stop this, and by mid-afternoon, we'd been pushed back to our HQ. With no other option, we retreated inside, leaving lawlessness to reign in our absence. Returning to see this was none other than Marcus Teller. Taking matters into his own hands, Teller rode back to Orthanc, where he set to work rallying a civilian militia. Orthanc's Bounty Collectors Guild would make short work of the rioters, and the promise of a sizable payment quelled all of Lord Julian's concerns. Teller's militia, as it would come to be known, promptly set out towards Laketown, marching in loose column along the narrow dirt path. Arriving shortly after nightfall, the force split into two battle groups, with Teller approaching from the east and Julian from the south. Attacking in unison, the groups engaged stragglers on the outskirts, quickly routing them with several volleys of crossbow fire. Advancing further in, the forces reunited to take the market, before separating once again to conduct a pincer maneuver. Julian's forces pushed north, facing heavy resistance in the square, while Teller flanked west through the farms and up onto a docked ship. Using the deck as a firing platform, the docks were quickly cleared, allowing Teller to loop around and capture the town square. From here, Julian's forces overran the town's upper levels, while Teller marched northwest towards the Guard HQ. A Warbeast cavalry charge routed most of the remaining looters, allowing Teller to sweep in and put an end to the siege. With order restored, I stepped outside to look on Laketown through new eyes. Well, through new eye. The markets had been stripped bare, and the courthouse burned to the ground, with ash and soot falling gently to the ground, like snow. But in that moment, I saw Laketown for what it truly was. Our prosperity was long gone, our trade empire destroyed. The age of Laketown's dominance was over, and now I faced a choice. Accept the will of the people, or cling desperately to power. I made the wrong choice. Effective immediately, I declared martial law, forming an interim military government to replace the council, and granting the Guard, and thus myself, direct rule over the state. Teller's militia was brought onto the Guard payroll, where they would occupy Laketown indefinitely. While the rights of assembly and protest were suspended, and the will of the state would be enforced with an iron fist. Drastic as these measures were, they would ensure order for the foreseeable future. And with that, I could focus my attention on the future of our state. With the collapse of the guild system, Laketown's shattered economy broke. Our trade rights and contracts were sold to Slateport and Salendia, but it wasn't enough. To prevent mass unemployment, a major public works project was organized: the construction of the Interstate Highway. Extended from the ruins of an ancient road, the interstate was a concrete marvel of engineering, running straight through the Republic's center, connecting it together like never before, and ending its reliance on the poorly kept paths, trails, and trade routes we made all those years ago. There was another motive for this project, of course, besides employment, and no, it wasn't generosity. Without its economic or political dominance, Laketown would have no choice but to cooperate with the other states to survive. And as such, I realized it was high time that we mend our damaged relationship with the rest of the Republic. To further this, the Laketown Lemon Research Agreement was signed, granting scientists from the land of Lemon access to S.P.R's comet, where they would cooperate with Professor Schultz and his team on their long-stagnated study of the crash site. An entirely political move on my part. I was surprised when it actually paid off, as the combined team found and excavated a deposit of biological material from the comet's center. This heart, as it was nicknamed, was transported to Lemon for safekeeping. As the weeks passed, Laketown settled into a cautious stability, and my attention returned to a lingering shadow. The wave of terror attacks across the nation had left a significant impact on its people. And while the perpetrator may have lain dead, many were still living in fear. As such, in a public address given outside the Senate, I announced the formal closure of the bombings case, declaring our old friend, the Cloaked Rider, to be the sole offender. While lacking any real evidence, I blamed the Sugarcane Bandit, a known criminal named in one of the Birch signs. And with that reassurance, the people of the S.P.R. could finally breathe easy. And for the first time, I was met with unanimous praise and gratitude. I might have let it get to my head. Because later that month, I proposed the magnum opus of my political career to the Senate. Together, we would build a grand capital city, a monument to a new era of cooperation. Every state would contribute to the building effort, and every citizen would be guaranteed a right to residence. Met with unanimous approval, construction began in the summer, and would only finish well into the winter. My role in the capital's development would cement Laketown's re-acceptance into the national community, something I was quick to capitalize on. launching a bid for that year's presidency, and winning the election. Finally returning to office in January of 4 ADR. The first months of my reign were quiet, but this would change come late spring, as the people of Celendia and Slateport held a spring harvest festival. Hosted in Slateport, the festival was a grand celebration of our unity, a chance for all states to share their prosperity with the wider Republic. The main attraction here, of course, was the Celendian Farmers Market, with attendees coming from across the continent to sample the spring crop. This, curiously, even included the now independent Hellenic state. Their priests were eager to host sermons and give thanks for a bountiful harvest. In talking with the Archbishop, it seemed attitudes had been shifting there lately. Pro-Republic sentiment had skyrocketed after our recent projects, and after several rounds of Celendian cider, they asked to rejoin the S.P.R, finally reuniting the nation under a single banner. Refusing to wind down, the festivities continued well into the evening, with drinking, dancing, and, well, more drinking. It seemed the party would never end, both literally and metaphorically. That was at least until dusk, when we were rudely interrupted. Outside the Dewdrop Inn, we discovered a freshly dug grave. A sign marked the rough patch of dirt, inscribed upon which, in blood-red ink, were the words, "Here lies a traitor. May they never find rest." To my dismay, Slateport's authorities had no knowledge that this was here. And so, with no other choice, we began digging. Clearing the loosely packed earth, my heart sank as the vile stench betrayed the gruesome sight awaiting us. There before us lay the body of Tristan Bartz, missing, presumed dead for well over a year. And yet, here he was, the rot only just setting in. As the crowd stared in awe at that dreadful scene, I found my gaze drifting elsewhere. Looking back at the sign that marked the grave, I couldn't help but notice its construction. It was made from a fine birch wood. With Bartz's death, so too died that era of the Republic's history, and in its wake would come another of division and fear. You know, it's hard to look back at those years without despairing over the mistakes we made. Our second year was far from the Republic's finest, our achievements overshadowed by corruption and turmoil. But in our third, we saw a glimpse, however brief, of a brilliant future. Through collaborative works, We built wonders of engineering and made strides towards a fairer, more united world, and yet, that future would never come to pass. Because the coming years would stretch the threads that bound together the Republic, unraveling east from west into a tangled mess, incapable of uniting in the face of a common threat. I spend a lot of time thinking about all the things I could have done differently, but I think therein lies the problem. Maybe it's not just the decisions that I made, but that I was in a position to make them in the first place. I started as a puppet, and yet, when my strings were finally cut, I just kept the show going. It doesn't matter now, of course. Now I'm nobody. And you know, it's actually kind of refreshing.